Oof, sorry. Hang on. Sorry, just a sec. We just had quite a large explosion. What's going on? Yeah, it just felt like it was literally.
Quite a few going
Yeah, what's going on?
So,
Oh, okay.
Yalda,
Okay.
what just happened?
So we're not quite sure whether it was an explosion or a sonic boom, but Richard, for the last week, we've been hearing about these explosions. But where we are in the hotel, we can hear the occasional sonic boom and the drones hovering overhead, but never so close. And this now feels like it is incredibly close. We can hear. I mean, the curtains suddenly moved. The doors were rattling. So it's. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
see
was
the
quite an.
people. I see your team moving around and checking it out. Welcome to The World. I'm Richard Engel, Chief Foreign Correspondent for NBC News.
And I'm Yalda Hakim, lead world news presenter for Sky News.
And here we go. We are launching our podcast. And it's a great opportunity today, since it's the first one, to let people know who we are, why we're doing this, and convince them, hopefully, why they should tune in every Wednesday to get a better understanding of this crazy world we're living in.
You and I have had long conversations, Richard. Our paths have crossed over the years, right across the planet in some of the world's hotspots. Even now, we're both in Lebanon at the moment because of the escalating situation here in the Middle East. Something that goes on over here does impact people where they are.
This is a unique place. I am in southern Lebanon. You right now are in Beirut. I can see the cameras behind you. I can see the. I think I know that. I think I know that hotel. So since this is our first foray out there, let's tell people a little bit about ourselves. How did you get into this business?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, our stories are so different, yet so similar in the way in which we came into this business. But as you say, I was born in Kabul. My family left the country when I was 6 months old, and they became refugees in Pakistan. And my father is an architect, so he knew an architect in Australia, and they moved to Sydney, where I grew up. And much like those Lebanese children, I, grew up as an Afghan Australian. But I always wanted to be a storyteller. I always wanted to be a journalist. But I remember being, 19, 20 years old at university, and I got a job as an intern. Work experience kid, actually, not even an intern, at one of the local channels. And it was very much, I wanted to have a platform, not just for what the people of Afghanistan were going through, but I could see the misery everywhere. And so I launched into it. I learned how to use a camera. I fooled my parents into believing that the network was sending me to India to film a story. And they said, really? You've just started. How are they sending you to India?
You're an intern. They're already sending you to India. Wow, that's quite amazing. They didn't buy it?
Well, they said, who are they sending you with? And, I said, well, they're sending a crew. We're going out to do a story about Western women using Indian wombs. They were using Indian women as their surrogates. And so I was going to film the story. I went to Gujarat. That was my cover. They didn't know I was traveling on my own, though, in my early 20s. And then I finished filming that story. I got myself to Delhi, and I called my mum and dad, and I said, I'm going to Kabul. They're now sending me to Kabul. And they said, what? They're out of their minds. This is a war zone. You don't know what you're doing. Where are you staying? What hotel have you got? And I said, I'm leaving in 2 days' time. And so my parents booked a flight. They hadn't been to Afghanistan since they left when I was 6 months old. They hadn't returned. They arrived at Delhi airport saying, there's no way in hell you are traveling to Afghanistan on your own as a 22, 23-year-old kid. And we all jumped on a plane. They returned to an Afghanistan that was devastated, but was being rebuilt, in a country that they didn't recognize. They hadn't been back for 23 years. We filmed stories. They were my security. I took my dad into the old Russian cultural center, which had converted into a drug den. So we went in, all these people were smoking opium, and he kept looking at me, this like respected architect in Australia, just kept looking at me going, really?
And did the Australian broadcaster put the stories on?
I went back to Australia and I said, listen, I've just spent 3 weeks of my leave in Afghanistan. And they just went absolutely nuts. There's no insurance. This is a war zone. We did not sanction this trip. They took the tapes. They looked at what I had done. And it was the highest rating story of the year. And they sold it on.
Good for you.
They sold it on and they gave me a third of the funds. And I went off and did something else after that. So it was quite a journey. But I mean, you have a very similar story in terms of, wanting to do this from a young age and being a go-getter, getting out there and doing it.
I wanted to be a journalist since I was a little kid, and I thought it would be romantic. I thought the idea of journalism was just a wonderful profession. So that's what I wanted to do or try out. And I after college, I moved to Cairo. I thought the Middle East was going to be the story of our generation. I'm 50 now, so I graduated college in 96, 51 technically. And I graduated college and I was like, okay, let's do this. I took $2,000 of money and a copy of Zorba the Greek, which was my favorite book at the time. I moved to Cairo. I lived in a rundown neighborhood, really, really rundown. It was lovely. The people were great, but it was a top floor of walk up, no real water. Some of the windows didn't have glass in it. It was just cardboard, lots of dust and heat. And it was relatively Spartan experience, but it was a good place to start because I could learn Arabic, became the editor of a local English language newspaper. Then I was in Jerusalem, did that for a few years. I was mostly the Palestinian affairs correspondent at the time for the French news agency. So my job was to translate and report Arabic copy, French copy, and put it into English. But then the big break, I would say, came for me with the war in Iraq. It was clear that the U.S. was going to war against Saddam Hussein, that the U.S. was going to invade Baghdad. Didn't make any sense to people at the time in the region. Suddenly, Bush comes to power, and it's right after 9/11, and suddenly he's going to war in Iraq. Everyone kind of understood why the U.S. went into Afghanistan to topple the Taliban because it had been hosting al-Qaeda. That made some sort of logical sense. I remember even at the time when I was in Afghanistan, even the Afghans got it. They're like, yeah, okay, we understand.
They wanted it. A lot of Afghans wanted it because of the brutality that they faced under the Taliban.
But then the Iraq war came as a shock. It came out of no place. It's like, what are you talking about? Where is this? Why are you doing this? Why? It wasn't involved in 9/11. Saddam Hussein hated these Islamic extremists. He used to put them in jail and torture them. He had been a U.S. ally, a close U.S. ally for years. And then suddenly the U.S. is building this military coalition and is marching to Baghdad and creating this story that he was about to develop weapons of mass destruction. So I wanted to cover that. I thought it was going to be a major change of events in the Middle East. But I couldn't get in. There was a certain kind of visa you could get called a human shield visa offered to foreigners, particularly Americans. We were the top of the list. And the idea was you can get a visa if you're willing to go to Baghdad and be a radical peace activist. So my idea was that I was supposed to go to Baghdad and like chain myself to a runway or to a power plant and be like,
extraordinary.
Don't bomb us. I'm an American. Let's make love, not war. Peace, peace, peace. With the hope that my presence would prevent the Americans or give them pause to bombing. So I said, okay, I'll get one of those visas. I had no intention of chaining myself to anything, but it was a way to get a visa to get in the country. I took $20,000 in cash, which I'd saved up. I put it in my like a sleeve, like these sock sleeves around my ankle, got in as a human shield, and then never showed up for any human shield duty. I was like, oh, thank you very much.
A lovely part of this story you've completely skipped over is when your mum, the role that your mum actually played in your dream to become a journalist. She tell us that story about handing you the newspaper.
When I was a little kid, the reason I had this romantic vision of what an international journalist would be like is my mother is a very elegant, very beautiful woman. I've never seen her really without her makeup or without her hair done. We were traveling. We were in Morocco at the time. I was a little kid or young pre-teenager. And in our hotel, they used to put a newspaper under the door every morning. And it was a summary of the world news. It was the International Herald Tribune. And I thought it was really interesting. And I was flipping through it and I was reading it. And it was reading it about, I don't know, everything from art exhibits that were going on in Venice and Paris to political upheavals in Greece to wars in African countries. And I thought it was fascinating. It was a window into a world that I really didn't know that existed. And I was sitting in the hotel one day. I was sitting on the steps outside waiting for my mother to come down so we could go for dinner. And she arrives and sort of floats down the stairs as she tended to do. And she sees me reading this newspaper. And she said, "Oh, what are you reading?" I said, "Oh, this," and I showed it to her. She said, "Oh, that's a great paper. Yeah. I think they're based in Paris. I could see you working there one day."
Huh.
And I said, I didn't say, I was like, so could I. So could I. And unfortunately, the paper doesn't exist anymore. But that was the seed that was planted.
I guess this is the importance of for us, why we want to do this. We've known each other for a number of years. We became quite close, actually, following the fall of Kabul. We were constantly, I remember like talking to you, almost every hour. We were texting back and forth. People were evacuating out of the country. And I was asking you what was happening on the ground because I hadn't made it in yet.
Yes, we'd known each other for years. We have lots of mutual friends. We'd known each other at a distance, but then we really became close when the Americans were pulling out of Afghanistan. The Taliban were closing in. I was in Kabul. You were trying to come in. We were talking daily.
Yeah, I was coming back to a very different country, Richard, as you know. I mean, the restrictions on women had come in. Girls couldn't go to school. Women were being asked to completely cover up. You could see nothing but their eyes. They were being asked to use face masks, the COVID masks. And I remember coming into the foreign ministry to get my accreditation and, being confronted with the boogeyman. That's how we viewed the Taliban during the duration of this conflict. Sure, we'd interviewed them at different points, but they were now all over the city. And I remember at the foreign ministry, they said some American journalists are inside with the spokesperson for the foreign minister who's going to give you the accreditation. And the doors opened and you came out. And I remember feeling suddenly, actually, weirdly, quite safe seeing you. And I wanted to give you a big hug. And you were like, not now. Now is not the place.
It's not really the time and place for
maybe not here with the Taliban.
I was nervous for you because, okay, I was an American. The Taliban were the enemy, but at least they knew who I was. You, as an Afghan woman who was needling them every day, you were writing every day. It's been 2 days since girls can't go to school. It's been 3 days since girls can't go. You were deliberately poking them. And they saw you, sure, as a foreign journalist, but they also saw you as an Afghan woman who'd gone abroad, who'd been educated, and now had come back. And you were going to stir up the pot. You were going to inspire other Afghan women to be like you.
They didn't want any women inspired by me.
They don't need any more Yalda Hakims. They hate the Yalda Hakim model. They don't like that model.
But, Richard, these are the stories that we're going to be telling on the podcast, a window into where we cross paths, the stories we tell, the people that we meet.
And that's why I hope this podcast is going to be interesting, fun. People can see the world as we see it, can get to know us in this different kind of environment. People actually can write in. I've got the email right here. They can write in theworld@sky.uk. They can write in with questions. We will try and get to them, interact with people, interact with each other, and talk about world affairs in a way that is different, hopefully more interesting, intimate, interactive, and not just one way. Here we are standing there with a mic. I'm going to tell you what's happening based on sources or press conferences or official news, and have a nice day and sign off.
The first episode will drop October the 9th.
Every Wednesday, starting on October 9th. So please tune in, everyone. I think you're going to find it, I hope you find it to be an interesting conversation and help you understand our crazy, bizarre, dangerous, but also beautiful and fascinating world a little bit better.